So I want to begin by thanking everybody for joining us today. We today are unveiling our new Slow Streets program. It's something that's been in the works for quite a while, almost 3 weeks now. As you all know, 3 weeks ago, we closed all of the city parks, and we still encourage people to get out and walk. But we wanted to eliminate as much as possible at the places where people could congregate, especially during this 3-week stretch that we just went through. All of the models that we were looking at and all of the models that we were following were telling us that Rhode Island was going to reach its peak and it surged somewhere around these 3 weeks. So we wanted to make sure that we were proactive and aggressive to make sure that folks weren't congregating in different places. Also, we knew that as we were approaching our peak, we didn't have all of the figures and numbers, but we did have a hunch and we did have a sense that has since become much clearer that there's a concentration of COVID-positive cases here in Providence. And as we've seen, there's an extra concentration in the Latino community. And so for all of those reasons, we wanted to make sure that we were very aggressive and did whatever we could to make sure that we would prevent the surge that would overwhelm our hospital system. So it's encouraging to hear the head of the ICU at Lifespan say that we're beyond the surge. However, we're not letting our guard down. We know that especially as the weather begins to get much nicer, people are going to be outside. We need to make sure that everyone is taking all of the precautions that they can to indeed protect themselves and protect others. So we are taking one first step to help spread people out so they can enjoy the outdoors, stretch their legs, but do so in a way that's healthy for them and safe for everyone around them. As we jumped into planning for this Slow Streets program, we also mapped the entire city, and we wanted to focus on streets and neighborhoods where we anticipate that there'll be a lot of activity. And essentially, we looked at the densest neighborhoods and the densest parts of the city. We also looked at communities that lack backyard space. So our planning department worked together to put that all together. We appreciate all the work they did with that. At the same time, this gives us an opportunity to use one of our largest and most valuable assets, which is our streets. We want to make sure that everyone has equitable and accessible options available to them as we start to leave our house because of the nice weather and just stretch our legs and get out there. So we've identified nearly 13 miles of city streets across our city that can be used for walking, running, riding a bike, and simply being outside and being active in a way that's safe and allows for social distancing. As you know, even if we're encouraging folks to get outside and use our sidewalks are very narrow, and they bring folks in close contact with each other. So beginning this Saturday, May 2nd, we're excited to be designating 13 miles of streets as slow streets. They'll still be available for car traffic, but it will only be for local car traffic. And emergency vehicles and trash pickup, they'll still have access to these roads. But primarily, we want folks to feel comfortable spreading out and using these roads so they'll be safe for pedestrians. It's something that many cities throughout the country have tried at this time, and my team has been in touch with many of them. And we've learned from the steps that they've taken, and we believe that we can execute on this in a way that's helpful to our residents and also safe, first and foremost. In addition to that, we are going to be opening up a number of green spaces for active use and local access only. And by active use, we mean either you're continually walking, running, or biking, but you have to be moving. And for this, and they're also accessible for local access only, meaning that the parks that I'm about to mention, you we're not opening up the parking lots, so you can't drive to them. But if you can walk to them, if you can ride a bike to them, then they're accessible to you. So parks such as Roger Williams Park, India Point Park, Dexter Park, Gano Street Park, Blackstone Park, Newtoconnicket Park, Wampscut Park, Riverside Park, and Dunedin Park. These areas were selected because they specifically targeted high-density residential neighborhoods or places where we know that folks are using, and so we want to provide more space for people to distance themselves. This is an effort to support our residents, particularly residents that have limited backyard space. But I do want to underscore that we are not opening parking lots at the parks in these neighborhoods. The parking lots will remain closed, as will courts, fields, and playgrounds. So that we hope to open at some point in the future, but that's not a step that we can take yet, given the ongoing concern and the ongoing threat that the virus proposes. For the success of this plan, it's also equally important that residents continue to follow the current restrictions and guidelines, which means, first and foremost, please maintain physical distancing of at least 6 feet. We ask folks to limit groups to 5 family or household members. So the state restrictions on the number of people that can gather, that is still in place. Very importantly, we ask everyone to wear a face mask whenever they're outside. It could be a bandana, it could be a fabric mask, it could be anything that covers your nose and mouth. And this is for all individuals over 2 years of age. We ask everyone to stay home if you're experiencing any symptoms. And of course, if you're driving, please use a great deal of caution and drive below the speed limit of 10 miles per hour on these specific roads. We, just as we would under any circumstances, please obey all traffic laws, all traffic signals, and traffic signage. We're going to have ample signage out there so that there is no confusion. But we need everyone to play their part, and please be careful observing all of the restrictions and guidance that's in place. Another important part of this plan, and the thought behind it, is to intentionally create a space for cars to safely coexist with pedestrians and people riding bicycles. That's very possible. We've seen it done in many other places, and we're excited to try it here. Emergency vehicles, residents who live on the street, and vehicles that require access to essential services such as trash and recycling, they will still have access, so all of that will still be in operation. To keep our other residents safe, we've also reached out and activated a network of volunteers. So we're going to have volunteers out at many of these sites. They've been stepping up to the plate, and they've agreed to help us ensure that folks are following the guidelines while using our slow streets. So we're going to make use of our volunteers, and they're going to help make sure that this goes as smoothly as possible. We're going to continue to closely monitor local testing and the continued impacts of the virus on our community. And we're going to make adjustments and additional announcements on this as needed and as warranted. We hope to be on the other side of this pandemic, but we are not there yet. I encourage everyone to please continue doing your part to stop the spread. And if you'd like more details on this, please visit Providence Slow Streets and there's much more information there at www.pvdcovid19.com. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mayor. Steph Machado.
Hi, Mayor. Good morning.
Morning.
Leading up to this announcement today, I think one of the number one emails I was getting this week was, why close streets to traffic when you could just reopen the parks? Now you are reopening the parks, so why incur the cost of closing these streets if people can now walk in the park?
Well, they go together. They go together in the sense that it gives folks even more space to spread out. But on top of that, we're not reopening all of the parks. The parks that we are opening are the ones the larger parks, and the one that allow for running, biking, walking, hiking, for that kind of active use. And so, people don't have ready access to this throughout every part of the city. So if you can't make it to one of the parks, we want you to still have access to a place in your neighborhood where you can walk around and be active while not coming in too close of a contact with other neighbors. So it's really something that goes in conjunction. And as we've learned about the Slow Streets program in other cities, that's exactly what they've done as well. It's not necessarily a replacement, but more so an addition. When you go together, you're giving people more opportunities to be active and be outside without violating the social distance guidelines.
And are you expecting to use the full $15,000 that was approved by the Board of Contract and Supply for the signage and whatnot on the closed streets?
I believe so, and a lot of that goes to the barricades. And those barricades are going to be very helpful to us in the future. So even after we're not using them for this, there's going to be plenty of uses for them in the city.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Lindsay from Channel 10.
Hi, Mayor. Thanks for doing this today. We were just wondering, which streets and which areas specifically are you guys looking at for this?
So you guys should have received a press release that outlines all of those streets. And
All of those?
yeah.
Okay, and so can you tell us, to go further off of Steph's question, you said that you don't believe you'll use the full $15,000?
I said that we will, and that much of that is going to go to the barricades, and the barricades are going to be helpful to us, not just through this, but also into the future. So there's going to be a lot of use for them. I do want to underscore the point related to your first question in terms of how we selected these streets. And there were really three factors that we considered. The first factor was looking at the most densely populated neighborhoods. Second, looking at streets that were indeed being used. And third, we looked at neighborhoods that had the lowest percentages of backyard space. So that was the guidance as we looked on the map and decided what streets to focus on.
With just one more question, with so many cities and towns struggling right now with revenue very much nearly at a standstill because of what's going on, is this detrimental in any way, spending this money to the city? Is it harmful in any way? Because that's a concern we're hearing from some residents.
I don't believe so. I do want to stress that this is something that goes in conjunction with our the steps that we've taken to be very aggressive and to be very cautious when it comes to the virus. We understand that the weather's getting nicer and that people are going to be going outside. As they go outside, we want to give them as much opportunity to be out there without coming in close contact with other residents. And this is something that's going to help a great deal with that. The investment of $15,000 for these barricades, the truth of it is that in the grand scheme of things, this is a very, very low cost investment if we can spread people out and prevent people from being infected with the virus.
Thanks, Mayor.
Okay, Jordan?
Yes, hi, Mayor. Thank you for your time. You mentioned that you're targeting high-density areas. Is this residential density, or are there commercial businesses that could be impacted by this?
It's residential density. And so let me just go through it. Residential density was one of the important factors, but it's not the only factor. We also looked at places that get a lot of use as it stands, and also places where there are neighborhoods where there are low percentages of background space. So this was the guide for us, and we also wanted to spread these streets out throughout the entire city. So with that as a guide, that's how we put the plan together for these specific streets.
And just one more quick question, talking about enforcement. I know you mentioned the volunteers. How else is this being enforced?
we're working with our Parks Department staff and also with public safety. The truth is that we're hoping that people will continue to observe the guidance and the restrictions that we put in place. The overwhelming number of people have been abiding by our guidance up until this point, and especially now that people are going to want to be outside because it's getting nicer. We're asking them to self-police. That's really the most important part. But in particular, I'm excited about the number of volunteers that have stepped up and they want to be helpful. So we're going to have volunteers out at various sites, and they'll provide guidance not just for people driving, but also for people out there walking. It's really, really important that as more people are outside, please cover your face, cover your nose and mouth to make sure that you're not spreading germs and potentially even provide protection against inhaling some germs. But primarily, we need everyone to do their part. It's really self-policing that has the biggest impact here. And if everyone does indeed do their part, we should be fine.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. And excuse me, Madeline?
Hi, Mayor. How will Providence be affected when the governor lifts her stay-at-home order on May 9th?
So we're actively in conversation with the state, and we're trying to coordinate as best as possible. We don't know yet exactly what is going to come on May 9th, but we want to coordinate and work with them as much as possible. So we'll see exactly what they have in mind, and we'll continue those conversations to make sure that we're coordinating. What we're doing today is we'll work under the current restrictions that we have from the state. And even if those restrictions are loosened, we do anticipate that it'll still continue to be relevant and useful after that. If there is anything that the state is proposing that is in conflict with what we're doing, well, then that's how the coordination, the ongoing coordination with the state will help us figure that out beforehand, so that as the dates come in, we can sort those out and make sure that there is no conflict indeed.
So if the stay-at-home order is lifted statewide, that doesn't necessarily mean that Providence will lift its own.
Well, like what do you mean specifically?
Will certain businesses be able to open back up in the city, things like that?
Right. We'll have to see. I don't remember that this isn't going to be an opening of the floodgates. It's going to be, slightly opening the spigot, and we're going to be very careful. We're going to take some initial steps, and I think that there's some simple or simpler steps that we can take. Many of them have to do with outdoor space, and so you see us beginning to take those steps. In terms of opening up businesses, I don't know what in fact is in store for May 9th. But we'll be coordinating with the state so that we're supporting each other as much as possible.
Thank you.
Lindsay, did you have an additional question, or did I just not blow you?
I did. I'm sorry. I just wanted to follow up, Mayor, and just ask how the policing of the parks is going. Has the city had to hand out any citations or anything like that? And how are you making sure that law enforcement and officers are hitting every spot right now that they need to be at?
That's a great question. Thank you, Lindsay. So it's been going well, and most people again are abiding by the restrictions and following the guidance. So we really appreciate that. I get reports on this every morning. How many calls for service we've received and what the outcomes of them were at a high level. And what I hear every day is that whenever there are calls and the police do show up and ask folks to disperse, people disperse very quickly. So it's not a difficult situation. sometimes people just need to be told to disperse, and then they do so. So I'm encouraged by that. Public safety has been at the table with all of these conversations. So we take into account what they're seeing, but also their capacity. And what we want to do with this Slow Streets program is we want light touch enforcement as much as possible. That's why we're asking people to self-enforce, and most people have been doing that. We're also going to be deploying volunteers throughout the city, so that's going to be very helpful. And in those cases where police is required, the police are ready and available. I will say that up until this point, I am not aware of any citations being issued specifically by the police. We can double check and get back to you with that information. But that, these issues, they haven't risen to that level where the police had to escalate and issue a citation.
Okay, so policing is only going to be on this volunteer basis. There won't be any paid city workers or law enforcement that will be policing these streets unless they are needed.
Oh no! I mean, it's a big operation, and it does require folks from departments throughout the city, setting it up and maintaining it. And whenever people are out, there's trash, and so it has to be picked up. So it does entail it is a large operation. But on the enforcement side, what we want is light touch enforcement. We're asking people to self-enforce, and that's where the volunteers come in.
And just quickly on a similar note, since you're blocking most traffic to these areas, we've been seeing in the city, and I know it's been an issue in the past, dirt bikes, ATVs, things like that. As the weather gets warmer, how are you going to enforce those from being off the street, but also from being off of those streets where you have pedestrians and walkers and bikers? Yeah,
well, we're going to continue to try to clamp down hard on the people using these illegal ATVs and dirt bikes. There are real limitations that we have in terms of policing them. Oftentimes, when you give chase to them, you simply create even more of a dangerous situation. So we're going to use the same protocols and policies that the police department have with respect to them.